Glad you got a chance.
I appreciate it. Okay, we are learning Leila Nishmas Mendel, Mariam Bas Kalman Reuven, her Neshama Shavan Aliyah. We are up to Ayin Vav Amud Beis. We are going to finish the sixth parak today. Where's Hashem? Okay, so we are discussing again. So let's just review what's been happening. So the beginning of this parak started off with a listing of all 39 malachos, and then after listing all the different malachos, after the 39 prohibited activities, the Mishnah started then unpacking and discussing the different, going into much more detail. The Mishnah did something funny, but it's kind of typical of the Mishnah. That is, it started backwards. So although we started off with 30 malachos going in order of the different processes that are involved in the construction of the Mishkan, the last example that was given was carrying, taking things from one domain to the other, and the Mishnayos then picked up from the last one and started discussing the details of carrying, what is allowed, what is not allowed, and we are now in the middle of that conversation, and then we're going to start working our way backwards and getting into the other malachos. So carrying for us, again, is a little bit always harder for us because it's not as relevant. Again, this past weekend, if anyone likes traveling, so this past weekend, just again, like going to place that on Erev, so again, exciting. Nothing crazy happened this time, no exciting stories to report, but the bottom line is there are always, actually, I did, okay, so we'll come back to this. I actually found, after I finished walking back from outside the Erev, I dug into my pocket and I found a thing of buttons, one of those like little button bags. Okay, I found it like after I already traveled, but yeah. I would have had to bring a chatas, but anyway, so possibly. Okay, I guess we can debate that. Fine. The bottom line is that, when we travel, so for those of us who are not accustomed, so it is just I guess, a word of caution. Although we don't think this is relevant, it is relevant from time to time, and so let's go into this detail. So we have to have measurements. Whenever we talk about any malacha, we're never going to talk about, you're not liable for a minuscule amount. It has to be a certain substantial amount. That's the basic principle. So let's begin. Hamotzi ochlim kigogreres. A person takes out food, any general food items. We had a whole bunch of different items were mentioned yesterday, but today we're talking about all other foods. The amount that you are liable for is the size of a dried fig. Okay, so basically anytime you carry the amount of a dried fig, basically like a handful of sorts, a little bit less, and then chayav, you are chayav, mitzdarfim zeh em zeh, and it combines. In other words, let's say you're carrying a little bit of cereal and a little bit of, fruits, they would combine together. Why? Because of the fact that they have the same measurements, right? This touches upon what we saw yesterday, and that is that whenever you have things which are of the same measurements, whenever you're liable for the same measurements, then they combine together to make one full measurement. So again, if I'm carrying cereal and I'm carrying fruits, they're two different items, but since they have the same measurements which make me liable, therefore it does combine together, okay? However, when we talk about food stuff, there are things which are not included. What are those? Chutz mikli pasan. The shells are not included. When we measure how much a person was carrying, a shell is something you don't eat. And therefore, although you're carrying the shell, it's not substantial, it's not important rather, and significant, that's the word I'm looking for, and therefore that's not counted for the measurement. Vigarineha, nor the pit. So, right, since we don't eat the pit, even though I'm carrying the pit, when we measure, did I carry enough to be liable for a karban chatas? The pit is not included. Vuktsehan, and the stem. Visuban umorsanan. Suban and morsanan are different types of bran. When you start separating, when you start creating, processing wheat, then there's different like coarse stuff that are typically not included. Nowadays we eat bran. Like bran is seen as like a substantial thing, but back in the day they would not eat bran. Bran was typically seen as like stuff for animals. So suban is the coarse bran, morsanan is the fine bran. Those are things that were not eaten, and therefore they're not included in the measurement. Okay, Rabbi Yehuda has a dissenting view. He says, "Chutz miklipe adashin shemisbashlos imahan." It's true we don't have shells. There's one exception, and that is lentil shells, because lentil shells are cooked with them. When you cook lentils, they would cook the shells with them, and therefore their shells are seen as important. And therefore, he says, when it comes to lentils, and you're trying to measure, did I carry enough to be obligated to bring a karban chatas? He says, when it comes to lentils, you would include the shells with the measurement. Okay, so far so good. Yeah. Okay. Says the Gemara. Ask the Gemara. V'suban umorsan lo mitzdarfin. The Gemara asks, why are you telling me that bran, coarse bran and fine bran are not included in the measurement for carrying? Vatznan, we learned in the Mishnah, and this Mishnah is referring to the laws of the hafrashas chala. Chameshes revaim, 4/5 of a kav kemach. Okay, kav kemach is like a certain measurement, va'od, and a little bit more, chayavin bechala. So if you have this certain measurement, 4/5 of a kav of flour, then you are chayav to separate challah. We'll talk about what that measurement is in our measurements. But the Mishnah says, hein the flour, visuban, and its coarse bran, umorsnan, and its fine bran. They all combine. So you see, when it comes to measuring for challah, if I'm making challah, and I want to know, do I have enough flour over here, and I want to measure. So how do I measure? I measure the flour, the bran, and the coarse bran and the fine bran. So you see the bran is included in the measurements. Clearly, bran is seen as something important, and therefore included in the measurement. So why over here are we saying the bran is not included? Amar Abaye says like this: Shekain ani ochel pito beisa belusa. Because when it comes to eating challah, a poor person will eat bread made out of unrefined dough, i.e. bran that's mixed in, and therefore bran is going to be included in the measurement for challah. When it comes to carrying, we do not take into account what this exceptional individual is going to do. In other words, yes, it's true. When it comes to eating, poor people, very poor people, will use bran, and therefore when we measure for challah, you're going to take bran into account, because if a person is using bran to make their challah, we're going to take the bran into account and say, do I have enough flour? Do I not have enough flour? And if this person is using bran, we're going to use it as the measurement. But when it comes to carrying, we look at the mean, we look at the normal, run of the mill type of thing. And since normal, usually people are not using bran, therefore when it comes to carrying, if a person carries bran as part of their flour, we ignore the bran and we only count the flour. Okay? Now, halacha l'maisa, how much flour does a person need to have in order to be chayav for challah? Right? So we fresh challah is applicable even outside of Eretz Yisrael. We have to take off challah anytime we make enough challah, or enough bread, I should say, and that is, so there is a machlokas, and therefore what we do is anytime you have a little bit more than 2.5, so you have 2.6 ounces of flour, then a person, ounces? Cups? Not ounces, cups, right? 2.6 cups of flour, then a person would, right? Cups. I'm all confused. What's in a bag is 5 pounds. Pounds, that's the word I'm looking for. Pounds. Okay, yes, I'm still a little tired. Red eye. Okay, yeah, sorry, there we go. Yeah, ounces didn't make sense either. Okay, pounds, thank you. Okay, so 2.6 pounds of flour you take off, you do have fresh challah, but you do so without a bracha, because it's a suffix. Once you hit 5 pounds, which is a full bag, then you would definitely take off challah with a bracha. Okay, the typical amount of challah is like a handful, or you do like kazais, which is about a handful, and you do your mafresh challah that way. Okay, that's the typical interpretation of what 4/5 are. Okay? Good. Rabbi Yehuda Omer. Now we're going to analyze Rabbi Yehuda said. Rabbi Yehuda Omer. Chutz miklipe adashim espashal zimam. Rabbi Yehuda, again, the Mishnah said that the Tanna Kama said that we don't include shells. Rabbi Yehuda came along and said, yeah, but that's not only true for other things. When it comes to lentils, then you do include the shells. So fine. Ask the Gemara, adashim in polin lo. Is it only true for lentils and not for beans? Vatani, we have a brisa which seems to imply beans as well. Rabbi Yehuda Omer. Chutz miklipe polin va'adashim. So we have another place. Our Mishnah said that Rabbi Yehuda says that lentil shells are the exception. However, there's another brisa which says that bean shells are also the exception. Beans and lentils. So which one is it? Lo kasha, no contradiction. Habechadati, habatiki. When it comes to fresh beans, then the shells are included. When it comes to old beans, the shells are not included. Atiki my time low. When it comes to old shells, why not? Amar Ravahu, mipnei shenirin kizvuvin v'ka'ara. Because beans, the shells as they age, they become very dark, and therefore it looks like they are flies. So when people so technically the flavor is the same, but people would not cook with the shells of old beans because they're very dark and it looks like there are flies in your food, and no one wants to look like there are flies in their food, and therefore basically Yehuda is saying any type of shell that you normally cook with is included, and so all lentil shells are going to be included. Fresh beans that are recently processed, harvested, those you would include those beans in the measurements. When it comes to old beans, you would not, because people throw out the shells of old beans because of the fact they look like flies. We just finished, I think, the hardest parak in the Masechta. We're like, how many daf are there in the Masechta? It's like 140? I forget exactly. Are we halfway through? I think we're halfway through. Yeah. Let's pretend we're halfway through. We're more than halfway through. Well done. Okay, I'm pretty sure. Okay, good stuff. Okay, mal stuff. We are going to begin a new parak. We're going to begin a new parak. I'm telling you, much easier. The last parak was a hard one. Okay, so now we get into, so we're going to jump to the Hebrew side. Okay, here we go. We're going to learn the next Mishnah, which continues on the discussion that we finished the last chapter on, which is the minimum measurements. Okay, hamotzi yayin, one who carries out wine, kidei meziga sakos, is liable if they carry out enough to mix a cup with it. Okay, so keep in mind, back in the day, you and I buy bottles of wine. Fine, it's wine. Back in the day, they would basically mix their own wine, and what that means, they would have like wine concentrates, like petal. Remember for those of us back in Israel, right? So they have like wine concentrate, very very thick, gooey stuff, and they mix it with water. Okay, so when we say the amount of wine, what's the amount of wine? The amount of wine needed to make a cup of wine with it. Okay, so again, the wine concentrates enough to mix it a cup with it. We'll see what that measurement is soon. Chalav, how much milk? Kedei gemia, enough to swallow a mouthful of milk. Okay, dvash, how much honey? Kedei litein al hakasis, in order to place it on a sore. People would place honey as a salve, like an ointment. They would place honey on a sore. Shemen kedei lasuch ever katan, oil enough to anoint a small limb. Oil was typically used back in the day to anoint oneself. It was like a cream. Mayim, water, kedei lashu behen esakilar, enough to mix an eye salve. So we're going to talk about this in more detail, but basically if someone has like an eye bruise or whatever it is, they would make some form of something that they would use to cover their eye, and a little bit of water was used to mix into it. So these are all like the minimum measurements of what's useful for this. In other words, if I'm carrying a drop of water, like literally like a drop, or like a piece of honey that just could touch the top of my finger, it's not substantial, it's not meaningful, and therefore we ignore it. It's only when I carry, so it's always, we're all looking for like the minimum amounts of these things, which are then going to be functional. They're going to be used for something, and these are all the smallest amounts, okay? Ushar kol hamashkin b'revius, and when it comes to all other liquids, the measurement is a revius. Okay, what is revius? The revius, according to many poskim, is 3.8 ounces. Okay, 3.8 ounces, not so large, is a revius, but yeah, basically something like two of those small shot glasses is about a revius. Okay, B'chol hashovchin b'revius, and all wastewater also a revius. So the Gemara is going to obviously ask, the whole idea over here is it has to be something which is going to be usable. What would be the use of wastewater? Water that's wasted doesn't make any sense, but the Gemara is going to explain even wastewater has a function, and there too it's going to be a revius. Okay, here we have a dissenting view. Rab Shimon Omer, kulan b'revius. Although the Mishnah, the Tanna Kama, just listed milk and wine and honey and oil, all of them giving different measurements, he disagrees. He says all the substances, the measurement is a revius. Whenever you have a liquid, it's going to be a revius. V'lo nemru kol hashirun halalu, and all these smaller measurements were only stated el l'matzniyin, only for people who store those things. In other words, if you recall, yesterday we spoke about according to the Tanna Kama yesterday, he said that if someone stores small amounts, let's say you're this guy who likes keeping like small amounts of salt, okay, like kernels of salt, granules of salt. So I store if I drop a piece of salt, I will put it away and store it. So for me, if I'm that guy, if I then go ahead and carry salt outside, I'm going to be chayiv. Rav Shimon disagreed. Rav Shimon said, no. You're weird. We don't take you into account. We ignore you, right? The measure, there's going to, even for the strange people who store things, there's still going to be minimum measurements, right? So he holds that all these measurements over here, milk's enough to swallow, wine enough to mix a cup with it, those are for people who store very small amounts, and even then, you're not going to be chayiv unless you carry this minimal amount. But for most normal people, you're going to go for revius. Right? In other words, Rav Shimon says, so again, there's a couple, so what's happening over here is like this. The Chachamim say that when I carry, anyone who stores small amounts, they are chayav for carrying that small amount. Rav Shimon says no. Even you who keep small amounts, there still has to be a minimum measurement, which is going to be like an objective minimum measurement. And that's how he understands the first part of this Mishnah. He says that when our Mishnah said that to be chayav for wine has to be enough to make a revius of wine, okay, so obviously, that means less than a revius. It's going to be, I don't know, we'll see, a quarter, a third, whatever it's going to be. That's only for someone who stores small amounts. But for most people, it's going to be a revius. Yeah? But that's the basic debate. Okay.
So we're supposed to assume that these other measurements are smaller than revius.
These measurements are all smaller than revius. Yeah. So, for example, think about it. The wine, it says enough to make a cup with it. So, if we're going to see a cup of wine is typically in revius. It's going to be a portion of that to make up a revius. Yeah. Good. Tana. Okay. So the Brisa taught to explain the first part of a Mishnah, which is what we're going to spend a little bit of time with. We're not going to finish this today, but the Brisa that goes on the Mishnah, the first words that said that for wine it's enough to mix a cup with it. Kidei mezigas kos yafe, in order to mix a nice cup. What does it mean? Ask the Gemara, my kos yafe, what does a nice cup mean? Kosho bracha, the cup used for a bracha after the meal. Okay, so if you are learning smichas chaver, what is the amount, or just know this, what is the amount that you need to make a bracha after the meal? So first of all, there's a halacha, a big discussion about, do you have an obligation to use a kosher bracha when you bench? Do you have to use a cup of wine to bench over it? Do you? Yes or no? Ideally, but yeah, most poskim say you don't have to, but ideally you might want to. It's a good idea when you bench to use a cup, to bench over a cup. Some say specifically with a zimun, some say with a zimun for 10 people. Fine. So it's not strictly speaking obligatory, but if you have 10 people, you definitely should. So the amount of wine, again, the Mishnah said you take out wine enough to mix a cup with it. And now, so we're saying, what do you mean to mix a cup with it? Depends how thirsty you are, right? How much is a cup, right? Ask someone, how much water is a cup of water? I don't know. Some people walking around with like these things on their back, like basically falling over because they have like so much water. And some of us drink like a shot glass of water the whole day and we think we're fine, right? What's a cup? So Gemara says, no, a cup of bracha, a cup that's used for making a bracha, which is a revius. A revius of wine, of total, meaning a total cup, the cup that we use for benching, the cup that we use for making any bracha of any holy thing is going to be a revius. It's important to keep in mind, by the way, and that is that the cups, which typically all the kosos that we use, whenever you look at any of the kosos, even the smallest ones, are revius. So just a couple of sidebar halachos. So when it comes to this, when it comes to making kiddush, you want to make sure your cup is the size of a revius, which is 3.8 ounces. I don't think any of the cup kosos, even like those small little Pesach ones that they give out, are certainly 3.8 ounces. How much wine do you have to drink? Just parenthetically, you have to drink what's considered a cheekful. So poskim say ideally about 2 ounces worth. Okay, which again is pretty small amount. The person making kiddush has to drink 2 ounces, and that's just something to keep in mind. But it's also to keep it just again. Sidebar to the sidebar, just very important. When it comes to Pesach, the halacha is you're supposed to drink rov kos, most of the cup. Okay, so people make a mistake, and that is that what they do is they say, it's Pesach, I want to have the biggest possible cup in the world. So they have these like koshel eliyahu for their arba kosos, they have these big cups. They're making a mistake, because why? Because most people are not able to drink like a full, like they drink most of the cup of the wine, they're not able to do. So it's better on Pesach to get a small, really, really small cup, make sure it's 3.8 ounces, and then you're able to do the whole cup, which is ideal, most of the cup, which you have to do, right? As opposed to what sometimes your chumras end up being kula. So again, you want to make sure a revius is 3.8 ounces, and that's the measurement of the cups that you have to have, both for Shabbos, Kiddush, Pesach, especially for Pesach, you want to make sure not to have, you want to have the smaller ones, and that enables you to drink rov kos, which is what you need to do. Okay, fine. Let's go back to our Gemara. Amar Rav Nachman, Amar Rabba bar Avua, Kosher bracha. When it comes to the cup of wine used for a bracha, meaning for kiddush or for benching, tzarich shehei bo rova revius. It has to contain a quarter of revius of pure wine, kidei sheyimzagu, so that it can be mixed. The wine can be mixed with water. V'yamod al revius will come out with a revius of wine. Again, so Rav Nachman, in the name of Rabba bar Avua, holds that the proper measurement, the mix of wine, pure wine with water, is 1/4 wine and 3/4 water. Okay, not so relevant to us, but we're going to go in a bit of a discussion about this. Again, our wine, we don't mix our wines, but back in the day, if you had pure wine, according to Rabbi Ravuha, it would be 1/4 pure, undiluted, mixed with 3/4 of water. Amar Rava. Rava says, "Afan ana namitanina." We're on Ayin Zayin Amud Aleph. I learned the same thing from our Mishnah. Why? Because it says, "Hamotzi yain kidei mizigas kos." The Mishnah says that you carry out wine enough to mix a cup with it. Vitani alone, we had a brisa that says kidei mizigas kos yafe. And the brisa said that it's enough to have a nice cup. Vikitani seifa, and the rest, and later on the Mishnah said, usha'ar kol hamashkin b'revius. All other liquids, you're liable for a revius. So Rava infers from there as follows. He says the fact that our Mishnah says that you need to have, right? What's he trying to prove? He's trying to prove that the amount we're mixing together is the amount that's needed for a revius, because at the end of our Mishnah it says that you are going to the amount that's needed is a revius, and therefore when the beginning of the Mishnah said that you need to have enough to mix with a cup, it's presumably enough to mix with a revius, which is going to be 1/4 of the cup of wine. We're going to go back because there's going to be a big debate. We're going to we'll come back to this last line, God willing, tomorrow, and because there will be a bit of a debate between Rav and Abai about this last point, so we'll pick up. We'll review that part tomorrow. We would, in theory, be doing Michtam Eliyahu right now, but I don't even know where it is. I just got back. I'm sorry. I'll find it, and Mir Hashem will pick up, God willing, tomorrow. Great to see you all, and see you all tomorrow.